Well, welcome to Unity of Metairie. Today I'm going to continue my series on the universal truths that Jesus taught. Today I'm going to look at the separation of church and state, or that defense against achieving political power through religion. Inside, if you like what you hear here today, please consider liking and subscribing so that we can grow and hopefully get our message out there more and more. We hear a lot, especially from the Christian nationalist movement, that this country was founded on Christianity. That the founding fathers were establishing a Christian government. If that was the case, then why did they put in the first line of the First Amendment? Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Period. And the reason for that is those who came to this country before it was even this country, many of them were escaping religious persecution from countries where a religion has taken hold and then gone against and persecuted those who did not hold those beliefs. Thomas Jefferson once wrote that because of religion, the soil of Europe is soaked in blood. And that's why I think they were so clear that this country needs to do two things. One, never establish a religion as the religion of the country. And two, to have religious freedom. That anyone in this country can believe whatever they want to believe as long as it doesn't violate the laws and hurt somebody else. Which I'll get into that in a second, where some people misuse Paul and all this argument that we should be a Christian country. But even if you say that, what flavor of Christianity? There are thousands of different ways. Well, I really believe that for every person who says they're a Christian, there's a different way to believe you're a Christian. But the ones pushing this are the far-right, evangelical, white Christian nationalists. And they're saying that this is what Jesus taught, and this is what the founding fathers meant. So I'm going to do what I've been doing, is I'm going to look at what Jesus and then Christianity teaches about it, and then look at the other four major religions in the world, and to see if that same theme is coming out. And when I can find that in all religions, the five major ones in this world, which is Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism, Islam, and Hinduism, that's when I declare it a universal truth. Because universal truth transcends all religions. And it's that universal truth that all religions are supposed to be trying to achieve and teach. So in starting with Jesus, there's the stories of the temptations. When before he started his public ministry, he went to the desert to fast and pray for 40 days. Now, there's another difference between the far-right evangelical and other far-thinking Christianity. The Gospels are not history. They were never meant to be history. They were teaching the truth that Jesus taught, and many times they incorporated that into stories that none of them would have known because, like, for example, the nativity stories. They're all different because they're not history. Just like the temptation in the desert. Yes, I believe Jesus practiced fasting. Yes, I believe he had these visions through meditation that we all can achieve, visualizations. And one of the temptations is the devil led him up and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. And the devil said to him, "To you I will give their glory and all this authority, for it has been given over to me, and I can give it to anyone I please. If you then will worship me, it will be yours." Of course, Jesus answered, "Worship the Lord your God and serve only him." But what he's done here is rejected political power over the world. He wasn't here to rule. He wasn't here to establish a religious state. He rejected it. In fact, I don't even believe he was here to begin a church. He was reforming Judaism at the time. He was teaching a truth of how to live out of love instead of fear and hate. Because when you look through the Gospels, as he traveled around, whenever a crowd gathering around him got too large, he and his close disciples would sneak away in the middle of the night and go someplace else. He wasn't trying to establish a church or religious belief that should then lead to political power. He was doing just the opposite. One of the quotes, and then the other time, one Trump asked him, "Well, should we pay taxes?" That's when he has the great line, "Give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God." In this one statement. Because back in those days, I'll read a quote a little bit, there was no separation of religion and government. It was all seen as one. This one statement separates church from state. Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God. One of the quotes that those who want to establish a Christian government here, they often quote Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 13, where Paul wrote, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God. And those authorities that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment." And they interpret that as Paul is saying that the government is established by God, therefore it's a Christian government. It's not what he's saying at all. The letter to the Romans is the only letter Paul wrote that wasn't to a group of people he already knew. This was kind of his introduction to Rome. And at that time, Rome was the authority, and there was no separation between that and religion. So Paul is saying that as we bring in Christianity, in no way should Christianity disrespect the ruling government. Kind of saying, I'm not coming in here as a revolutionary, I'm coming in here to teach what Jesus taught, not to overthrow Rome. especially when that was one of the reasons Jesus was crucified. Because people said he was talking about bringing a new kingdom to replace Rome. Because Paul goes on in this chapter to talk about, well, how do we deal with all this? And he says you deal with it by loving one another. And the proof that Paul was not submitting to the Roman government was they all violated the Roman law. The only religion you can practice is Roman religion. And that's why they were all martyred. So when they use this statement, it's completely out of context. Paul wasn't saying the government's instituted by God, therefore it's a Christian government. He's saying that as Christians, we must live in respect within the society that we live in. In another place, he said, when it is due. Because they did, in a sense, rebel. They broke the law, and they paid the price. But what happens when a government is run by one religion? Other religions are often persecuted. This quote comes from a man, his name is Brad Hart, and he runs a blog and a website called American Creation, where he discusses these topics. And in reference to Romans 13 and how people use it, he wrote, well, let's keep in mind that we are speaking of the ancient world, the world that had long fused the political and the theological worlds together by establishing kingships, Caesars, and other divine rulers. The notion of an independent church, separate and sovereign from the secular world, was more than just a novel concept. It was revolutionary. As a result, we can logically and rationally proclaim that a separation between church and state is very much a Christian concept. And as Paul later wrote in that same letter, owe no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. So it wasn't an argument to establish a Christian government. It's actually an argument against establishing a Christian government. And I found this quote and I couldn't find a reference who said it. But our job is to show the world the love of God and introduce those around us the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ in the Christian context of the love that Jesus taught, share one another. We will do this most effectively when we relate to others with humility, love, and respect, rather than with threats and attacks. And that is what clearly tells me that this Christian nationalist movement is not, to quote one of their phrase, of the Lord, because they're spreading fear, hate, and threats and attacks, and not love. So I believe Christianity is a bulwark of separation of church and state. That religion has no place in politics, and politics has no place in religion. Doesn't mean we can't participate, voting and all that good stuff, and of course paying taxes so we don't lose our homes and go to jail, but that the two are separate and need to remain separate. So now let's look at, can we find this same truth within other religions? And Buddhism was quite simple because the story of Buddha is he was born into a royal family. He was raised to be a great king, very rich, very powerful, but he renounced luxury and power to seek a solution to earthly suffering. Again, that's clearly the Buddha was saying there is a separation of church and state. He walked away from state, from being a king, to seeking enlightenment, to help those who suffer. That's why there's such a parallel between Jesus and Buddha. Jesus did the same thing. In that temptation, he rejected it and went out to the world to, through love, help those who were suffering. The Buddha awakened to truth. He then taught it to others. He wasn't concerned with politics. He once found a group of monks talking about politics, and he rebuked them, saying they should talk more about Dhamma, or the truth, or sit in noble silence. In other words, to meditate. Instead of spending their time talking about politics, why don't you meditate on the truth? Yes, as more people do that, that will begin to influence politics. And more people may vote and do things out of a sense of love instead of a sense of fear. Buddhist political theory denies that people have a moral duty to engage in politics, except to a very minimal degree. Pay the taxes, obey the laws, and maybe vote in the elections. And it actively portrays engagement in politics and the pursuit of enlightenment as being conflicting paths in life. I find that statement very, very interesting when we see so many politicians wearing their crosses on the outside and proclaiming that this is a Christian nation. I think back on what Buddhism teaches, that politics and spirituality, they don't really work together all the time and be very, very conflicting. So, for me, those are the two easy ones, because Buddhism so easily parallels Christianity. What the Buddha taught parallels what Jesus taught. Again, at this point, say, okay, I may have trouble with Islam because of what we see. But while the Quran doesn't dwell at all on politics, it does make mentions of concepts such as the oppressed, immigration, the Muslim community, that may have political implications. Yes, we need politics in this government to help deal with the homeless problem. We need politics and laws to help with a fair means to deal with immigration. But the Quran doesn't say that Islam becomes the politics. That was later. Then I found this article because we know there are Islamic states where Islam has become the national religion. And all we got to do is look at Afghanistan and Iran, to see the problem when that happens. Mustafa Akhil wrote an article called How Politics has poisoned Islam. We Muslims like to believe that ours is a religion of peace. But today, Islam looks more like a religion of conflict and bloodshed. Religion is not actually at the heart of these conflicts. Invariably, politics is to blame. But the misuse of Islam and its history makes these political conflicts much worse as parties, governments, and militias claim that they are fighting not over power or territory, but on behalf of God. And when enemies are viewed as heretics than just opponents, peace becomes much harder to achieve. And I believe this same warning applies to Christian nationalism. Once you declare that one group is right, no matter what they say, that automatically says other groups are wrong. And once that happens, peace, or the prospects of peace, begin to diminish. A long time ago, remember the TV show Bones? One of her, at the time was an intern, was a Muslim. And they were talking about 9/11. And he said, 9/11 was the moment that my religion was hijacked by the terrorists. That religion itself doesn't lead to political power or government, but governments, those seeking political power, can hijack religion and use religion as their justification to do what they are doing. That's where the problems begin. Now, Judaism is an interesting in looking at history because until recently there was no Jewish state. Most Jewish communities had very little power in their societies. Anti-Semitism ran rapid throughout the world. And even now that there is the Jewish state of Israel, Palestinians aside, within that Jewish state there is conflict because, again, which flavor of Judaism is going to be the one in charge? Because there are just as many views of Judaism as there are Christianity, as there are Islam. None of these religions are a solid group. And so which one will be in charge? In this country, again, this comes from the Union of Reform Judaism. They made this statement, this was back in 1965. Through its various resolutions and past actions, the Union for Reform Judaism have made the protection of religion from government and the protection of government from religion a priority. In 1965, the URJ passed a resolution, the separation of church and state, that said, and I quote, "While as citizens, of course, we accept and respect the laws of the land, including those laws which include provisions as to which we are and are apprehensive, we reaffirm our long-established position that the principle of separation of church and state is best for both church and state. and is indispensable for the preservation of that spirit of religious liberty, which is a unique blessing of American democracy. This principle is shared by forward-looking elements of all faiths. And I love that line, forward-looking. Looking to how all this is going to affect the future. When you look at Christian nationalism, which, and I'll say it, is part of MAGA, they're backwards looking. When they say make America great again, they're talking about going backwards to a time before women achieved the rights that they're still fighting for today. To a time when racism was totally rampant and segregation. To a time when homosexuality was considered a mental illness that people were diagnosed with. That's backwards thinking. Where we need to have more forward thinking. Thinking about a world that is based on love, peace, and acceptance of everyone. And finally, in Hinduism, there's nothing really in the Hindu scriptures that talk about separation of church and state. Remember, Hinduism is the oldest established religion in the world. But I find it interesting that one of the leaders there, one of the Nehrus, Jawaharlal Nehru, declared, this is now Indian law, India is a secular state in order to avoid Hindu nationalism and religious conflicts between Hinduism, Islam, Sikhism, and other religions. Religious instructions are prohibited in schools wholly owned by the state. Because India is saying that everyone has the right to believe what they believe, and that nobody else's belief should be forced upon them. Keeping religious instructions out of public school is not persecuting Christians. It is not saying you can't be Christian. It's saying your Christian beliefs can't be forced on those who are not. As simple as that. And there's two ways to look at it, especially you look at a lot of these school boards and other assemblies who are trying to put in place where we will have a Christian prayer before every meeting. And many of them are shut down when other groups come in and say, well, if you have a Christian minister, and it's interesting, the Satanic Church that fights this, they go and say, well, our satanic priest wants to say a prayer one time. And they usually drop it and let no one do it. Because it's all or nothing. Either you have no one lead a religious prayer, or you open it up to everyone to offer prayer or whatever. Because that's what religious freedom is. Doesn't mean we can't express religion, and even in public places, but it has to be fair and open to everyone. It is important to separate, this continues with this, it is important to separate state from religion to prevent domination of the majority religious group and violation of fundamental rights. This is India. Every individual has the freedom to embrace other religions and has the freedom to interpret other religions differently. It is the separation of church and state that allows us to have religious freedom. The lie is separates the church and state, persecutes Christians. That is the lie. Because once church and state merge, then religious freedom begins to disappear. I found this quote, and I quoted this person last time I talked. I'm going to look some more of his stuff. I have trouble with his name. He's a Buddhist, and his name is the Venerable K. Sri Dhammananda Mahathera.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
It is. And this is an article he wrote called What Buddhists Believe. There is an inherent problem of trying to intermingle religion and politics. The basis of religion is morality, purity, and faith. While for politics, it's power. In the course of history, religion has often been used to give legitimacy to those in power and their exercise of that power. Religion was used to justify wars and conquests, persecutions, atrocities, rebellions, destruction of works of art and culture. When religion is used to pander to political whims, it has to forego its high moral ideals and become debased by worldly political demands. And we've seen that so often in the world today and throughout history, where religion has lost its sense of love, compassion for political gain, for political power. And if that happens in this country, and all these atrocities we've seen throughout history because a government was based on a single religion, I believe we may begin to see. And so maybe this is a reason to vote. Is that when you consider who to vote for, maybe ask yourself these questions. Who will best serve in politics love? Who will best serve to keep this fundamental right of religious freedom alive? To me, it's important. What the Christian nationalists are trying to do literally scares me. It's one thing I can honestly say. Here at Unity Elementary, we could one day become their target. Mm-hmm. Because we don't share their view of religion and religious freedom. And groups like us, along with other groups that they say are wrong, we're the ones that end up being persecuted against. So religious freedom and freedom from politics is what allows us to believe what we believe, talk about what we believe, and at the same time respect and love those who may believe something different. Amen. Blessed be. Namaste.